Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Success Stories and Demo, OpenEdge Rules in Action. I'll be your host for this session this morning. My name is AJ Crete. I am a Partner Marketing Manager here at Progress Software. I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters. We have Carol Miller, who is a Senior Systems Engineer, as well as Chris Hogan, who is a Principal Systems Engineer here at Progress Software. This morning we'll get started with Carol Miller. Carol, good morning and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, AJ. This morning we're going to talk about OpenEdge Rules in Action, and with those rules comes customizing your application. And if you take a little journey with me, when you're thinking about customizations and taking a look at a menu, you're at Katz's Delicatessen in New York City, you take a look at this menu, and oftentimes we look at the menu and we want something special. So now we're going to take a look at a quick video that kind of takes that story a little further.
What can I get you?
I'll have a number 3.
I'd like the chef salad, please, with the oil and vinegar on the side and the apple pie a la mode.
Chef and apple a la mode.
But I'd like the pie heated, and I don't want the ice cream on top. I want it on the side, and I'd like strawberry instead of vanilla if you have it. If not, then no ice cream, just whipped cream, but only if it's real. If it's out of a can, then nothing.
Not even the pie?
No, just the pie, but then not heated.
Uh-huh.
What?
So there's an interesting story of a famous movie, When Harry Met Sally, and in this case, Sally wants her order her way. So if you take a look at what she was ordering, she looked at the menu and she says, okay, I'm going to get the chef salad and I want the oil and vinegar on the side. Not too bad of a customization. Then we get into the apple pie order. Well, in that case, the customizations started to come. Whether you want vanilla ice cream, no, I really want strawberry. And if you don't have strawberry, I want whipped cream. But I only want real whipped cream. And if you don't have real whipped cream, then I just want pie, and I don't want my pie heated. Well, there's a lot of customizations to keep track of. And I think the quote at the bottom kind of sums it up. I want it just the way I want it. And how many times have we talked to our customers when we're talking about applications, whether we're selling an application or we're selling it or internally or externally? We have our menu of OpenEdge applications available with a variety of modules and a variety of user interfaces. And we offer these options, and each order will come across with a potential customization. They may want, in my first order, a GUI client and a web client, and here comes the customizations. I want to customize pricing, and I also want to change the discount policies that are available, as well as any other additional modules. I may sell my application to a second customer, and they want, again, the e-commerce module, but in this case, they want the GUI client, and in their particular business, mobile is big, so they really want a mobile UI. They're going to customize pricing, but not discounting this time, along with a couple of additional modules. When we think about customizations, we're looking at, traditionally, managing multiple versions of the same piece of code to satisfy all of the customers, whether those customers are internal or external. And managing all of that code can become difficult because you have all of these details that you've put into the code that you're keeping track of. And then how are you going to keep track of the changes as the changes come along, whether they're external forces that make your changes to your application, internal government regulations. All of this is in the code, and it bars me from upgrading and making upgrades to my application to take advantage of new functionality or new features. So today we're going to talk about ways to manage that pain. And we're going to help you manage that pain of customizing your application by externalizing the business rules, taking them out of the OpenEdge AVL application code and into the Corticon business rules.
So the first thing that we want to talk about is exactly, what are rules for OpenEdge? And the rules for OpenEdge are actually the component that's powered by the Progress Corticon Business Rules Management Suite. And this is an industry-leading platform that's recognized by the analysts such as Forrester, Gartner, and IDC as really a world-class enterprise-strength business rules management platform. So if we want to speak in a little bit more detail about Progress Corticon, it's really about enabling your organizations to make better, faster decisions by automating your business rules. And we discussed these two concepts of decisions and rules because they are related to each other, but they're separate components. So what's an example of a decision? Well, very often that's something that you can ask in the form of a question in a business encapsulation. If you're a financial institution, you might want to know, should credit be extended to a particular customer? Now, how you make those decisions, well, that's where the rules come into play. And those might be business policies such as you don't want to provide credit to delinquent accounts. Or you may have more sophisticated rules that look at the amount of the opportunity. And loan applications for greater than $100,000 are going to require senior loan officer approval. Now, that's a sort of a binary decision of do we want to extend that credit and possibly how much credit do we want to extend. Other types of business decisions might have a sort of a more complex answer. We might look to do voyage planning for a shipment. Now, that really is how do we actually move valuable cargo from point A to point B? Much like you might ask Google for directions, and you get a very long and complicated answer that supports that decision. But again, there's still business rules that help you make that decision. In this case, it may be what is the configuration of the vessel that's transporting those goods. And hazardous materials must be shipped in double-hulled tankers. Also, there may only be certain points and destinations that are available to handle a particular type of shipment and that size. So a Class 7 supertanker is going to require what we call a minimum berthing distance of 300 feet or more, so only certain ports can handle that type of shipment. So if you're looking, why are we wanting to externalize those and what are the benefits of putting those rules in a platform like Progress Corticon? Well, the first is what we call model-driven development. So what that means is that you're able to express your business rules in a non-coding metaphor. So the first is that really opens up the ability to express those rules with a non-developer. It does not require ABL or programming experience to fully express and analyze and test. So it's very easy to use. The second is guaranteed rule integrity. So that means that not only can you specify those rules very easily, but you can ensure safe changes. So the addition or deletion or change of a business rule, you immediately understand the impact and how to resolve that if any errors are introduced. And then finally, performance and scalability. The patented DD or design time inferencing engine ensures that as you move your critical business decisioning assets into the platform, that this is not going to be a bottleneck in your decision-making criteria. Very fast and scalable, and what's been proven time and time again is market best performance and scalability. And finally, the ultimate benefit is seamless integration with the OpenEdge platform at both design time and runtime. So this means the introduction of this new technology is not going to extend or enhance the level of development efforts. It's actually going to decrease that, and you won't see extra workload.
So today we're going to show you an OpenEdge application interfacing with external business rules and how you're going to have one set of ABL source code to manage to do that. First thing we're going to look at is the OpenEdge application. So this is a demo application that we've created that is an order processing application for a wholesaler. And they have complex discount rules for each of their customers. So let's go ahead and take a look. So here is my application order entry screen. This is a GUI for .NET application that we've created. And we are simulating that this application is deployed at 2 different wholesalers. So I'm going to be the Carroll wholesaler today, and I am looking for a customer that wants to place an order. Okay? I find the appropriate customer, and then I'm going to go through and find the items that they need to order. I'm going to add some fins and just several sporting goods. So as a wholesaler, I am going through and adding a variety of items that I need to purchase for my particular business. I've added those all to my cart, and then I'm going to go to the cart. I have these items in my cart. I need to add the appropriate quantities, so I go ahead and do that. Okay, notice as I updated the quantities, the total for the order before the discounts is shown. So this is data that is just simply coming in and out of my Progress OpenEdge database. This is a client-server-based application with a GUI.NET front end and an OpenEdge database on the back end. I've got standard business rules at this point, just taking the quantity times the price, creating a total. Now, this is where the complex business rules come into play. My wholesaler has certain discount policies, and each business, each wholesaler in our scenario has different rules. So I'm going to go through and check for my discounts. And when I check for these discounts, it's running over to our OpenEdge Business Rules engine, Corticon, and seeing what are the promotions and pricing discounts that may be in play today. Maybe it's Black Friday, maybe it's Cyber Monday, or maybe they just have excessive inventory. We put this display box so that you could actually see all the rules that came into play for this particular order. So notice they were discounts on the footwear items, so they have equipment items, they've got high inventory discounts, and down here, Carol, by default, the very last rule, has a 1.5% discount that I give to my customers. So externalizing the business rules, these are not in my code. So if Carol decided to have a 10% discount today because she is doing a Christmas discount for this particular holiday season, I would just be able to do that because the rule would be externalized and changed in Corticon, and the check for discounts would find it automatically. And we'll actually show you that later. Now let's go back to the main screen and pretend that this same customer is price shopping. So they go over to the Chris wholesaler and they say, okay, I want to see what Chris is offering me for this same type of order. Let's go check for Chris's discounts. And in this case, notice that, again, there's a set of discounts, but it knows that Chris, as a wholesaler, offers by default a 2.5% discount to all of his customers. So he has a larger discount, so he may be the better price for this particular customer as they do price shopping. But I was simulating being two different wholesalers. Let's go through and create another order. So I'm going to go through from Chris's side and enter in a new customer and add additional orders. So we're just going to add some fins, some bicycle helmets, some golf umbrellas. Okay, go to my cart, and I'm just going to choose to add just a little bit of inventory to each. Okay, check for my discounts. Notice again, it knows that it was Chris the wholesaler. Automatic discounts based on his business rules. And those rules are outside of the OpenEdge application. So let's take a look at the application. In our case, we had an OpenEdge GUI for .NET application as the front end. You may have the Progress traditional graphical user interface. Maybe you're using the GUI for .NET. Maybe you have a traditional green screen application. Maybe you're using the new OpenEdge mobile capabilities. Or maybe you're using a web-based UI. All of these different user interfaces can interface with the Corticon Business Rules engine. Our application architecture has client-server, GUI for .NET front-end, client application, has business logic in the ABL going directly to the database. That ABL business logic calls out to the Corticon for its business rules when it needs to. All of that is done. It calls out from the ABL. So our client-server application has ABL business logic, but the rules that need to change more frequently, get updated, whether it be weekly, daily, monthly, for whatever reason, those are externalized from the ABL application code, making it easier for me to manage those changes because I don't have to go through the entire application lifecycle, meaning find that if-then-else statement, update it, change it, test it, then deploy it to my customers. And that can be a painful process, whereas I'm just going to go through and change it in the Corticon Business Rules engine. And that's what we're going to take a look at now. So Chris, tell us a little bit about Progress Corticon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carol. So as I mentioned before, one of the real powers of the Corticon Rules application is that it is very tightly integrated with the OpenEdge platform at both the design time and the runtime. So one of the great benefits of the integration is a shared data model. So what you don't have to do is go and create extra data structures in the business rule platform. And in fact, what we call the vocabulary or the data model in the Corticon platform is actually generated automatically from your data definition structures in the OpenEdge platform. So your temp tables, pro data sets, automatically generate that Corticon vocabulary directly from inside the Developer Studio. So once that's created, you're now presented with the Corticon Studio rule design environment. So it's a completely model-driven platform, no coding whatsoever to express all of your business rules. We leverage the vocabulary that's generated from OpenEdge. It's simply a drag and drop approach to derive your business rules. You're able to present what we call rule statements, and this is a human-readable representation of those business rules. And in fact, in the application that Carol was demonstrating, the listing of all of the different discounts that were applied, whether they were product-specific, category-specific, wholesaler or customer-specific, these are actually all documented in the Corticon platform and presented, so you can actually communicate the intent and how those decisions were arrived at. But the power is that although it looks like a simple spreadsheet, it's been proven with hundreds of customers and over a decade of implementation that the most sophisticated business problems can all be represented in this easy to understand and easy to use metaphor. The ability to guarantee what we call rule integrity. So just because you can model the rules very easily does not mean that there aren't flaws in your logical integrity. You may find, as we've seen with many, many customers, as they begin to model and recreate their rule representation in Corticon, that there are actually inherent flaws and inconsistencies. They may have rules that are in conflict with each other that actually tell you to do two different business outcomes. You may have inconsistencies or gaps. There might be data scenarios that could fall through the cracks and you really don't know how to address that particular business scenario. So the ability to automatically find these and resolve these particular problems in the design time, it really cuts down the number of iterations that you have to do in what you might consider traditional data-driven user acceptance testing. And then finally, the ease in which you can actually integrate these decision services into your OpenEdge ABL application. With effectively 3 segments of code that are automatically provided to you as procedure libraries, it makes it painless to integrate these decision services directly into your application. So now let's actually, take a look at how these rules are modeled and expressed inside the Corticon Studio platform. So as we mentioned, this is the exact same design environment that you can use as an OpenEdge application designer. We're using the unified design platform. However, we also do provide a standalone rules modeling environment. So that means that you might have an application organization where you have ABL developers that are exclusively focused on building the application, as we see here. And you can also provide a purpose-built rule modeling environment for people that maybe don't have ABL type of experience. You really have that flexibility to distribute these particular tasks that fits your best methodology and also the skill sets of the developers. So in this case, using the unified interface, we're going to switch over to what we call our Corticon design environment and actually now look at the rule modeling components. So the first component is what we call our vocabulary, and this was actually derived from the definition of our temp tables and the pro data sets inside the ABL code. The next element is a rule flow, which is really how we logically group together the rules that are helping us make that decision. So let's take a look at our first rule flow. So what we now see is that actually this is a decision that is comprised of maybe even smaller elements of a particular decision. So we have linked together what we would call rule sheets. I want to take a look very quickly at one of the first rule sheets, which is data validation. So very often customers want to be able to apply rules that don't necessarily make prescriptive business decisions, but they want to be able to evaluate and make sure that the data is complete and accurate. And the reason that you might want to include this in the rule modeling perspective instead of at the client level is that as you build a decision service, Carol showed you there were many different interfaces that might use these particular decisions. And some interfaces are very rich, sort of .NET or web-based, where you can have client-based logic that can make sure that there aren't nulls or that dates have prescriptive values. But there might be other application interfaces that are more character-based or maybe even batch processes that it's very difficult to embed sort of data validation logic. By including the data validation logic in the decisioning, you can ensure the consistency that this is performed regardless of the application that is using this particular decision service. So in this example, we can see that we're looking at 5 or 6 different data attributes, such as the customer name, the number, the state, and the zip. And if any of those attributes happen to be null or an empty string, then we're effectively indicating that this customer is not in a valid status. Now that's sort of the first step in this decisioning process. If we take a look at some of the other rule sheets that are in this rule flow, for example, an amount rule sheet. So this is where we're going to segment together rules that are relevant to the amount of the order. And if we drill down here, we can begin to see that we've broken these down into amounts categories that are relevant to us. So any order that has a total less than 100, effectively we're not going to provide any discount, at least at the order level. Orders from a range of 100 to 300, we're going to now introduce a 2.5% discount. So along with the model representation of this particular logic, we can also see that we have a rule statement that's associated with it. So this is the information that was actually communicated back to the application that you could use to update the user interface that indicates, well, why were they given an extra $2.50 discount? Well, that's because our business rules tell us that orders between 100 and 300 receive that particular amount, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, in this particular example, rules that relate to the amount, the category, and even inventory levels, we would consider these all sort of generic rules. They would apply to any end user, in this particular scenario, what we're describing as the wholesalers. Now, this is where we really see the power of externalizing these rules. Now we're going to show some examples of rules that are wholesaler specific, and in this case, sort of the end customer of the application developer. So here we have a rule sheet that is specifically addressing Carol's needs. And if we drill down, we can see that we're actually applying what we call a filter. And that indicates that this rule sheet, whether there's 1 rule or 200 rules, is only going to be applicable if that particular wholesaler is Carol. And the rules that are applying to Carol are that Carol takes a base 1.5% discount on all of our orders. Now, obviously, we could have even more specific rules that might be inventory specific, products or categories, etc. And if we take a look at the second element, we see that we have rules that are specific to our Chris wholesaler. And in this case, this is where Chris is taking that 2.5% discount. And finally, the last thing I want to show is the ability that we can actually even test all of the logic about this particular decision service right from within Corticon Studio. So what we don't have to do is sort of go through an application deployment cycle and building and deploying that and then doing traditional unit testing. Because the person that is sort of the subject matter expert about these discounting rules, might be completely unknowledgeable about the application architecture, and they're only focused on the business logic. So finally, the last asset that we can focus on is what we call our rule testing components. So here I have a test that I've created ahead of time. We simply drag and drop the vocabulary elements into our input panel, and I've provided some specific data. Here I have a customer named Mike Jones. I have the order amount, the state that he's coming from, his zip code, the wholesaler ID, and I have 2 items in his inbox or his cart. Here I have one item, which is item number 5645. It's in the footwear category. It's $4.50, and he has 4. And one other item from the diving category. So we're actually going to use this sample data and apply it towards the rule flow. And what we're able to see is that in this particular scenario, we can look at the rule messages that are associated with that. We can see that all orders have a base discount of $10. Orders between $350 and $500 get an extra $3.75 discount. We offer a 2.5% discount on footwear items, a 1% discount on diving category items, and finally, Chris, as the wholesaler, he takes an extra 2.5% discount. So ultimately, this arrives at we are providing a order discount total of $30.45. So if this didn't seem correct, or it seemed that they wanted to change the policies of pricing, well, they can just simply go back and look at these at the rule flow sort of component. Now, the last thing I mentioned, I want to take a look at some of these amount rules. Because we've modeled these particular rules with our ranges of prices, and what we have the ability to do is to analyze these for completeness. So have we covered all possible scenarios? Now, in the traditional application development world, I would have deployed this and just thrown lots and lots of use cases, lots of data sets at it, and analyzed the results, and hopefully a human being would try and sort of find that. And that might take a very, very long amount of time. In the Corticon platform, what I'm able to do is actually look for completeness and say, well, you know what? We told all of these ranges of prices that were applicable to us, but we failed to mention what to do if the order amount was between $300 and $350. In fact, if we look back in our ranges, we can see that I had 1 to 300 and 350 to 500. Well, we automatically found that, and we presented that to that subject matter expert. Now, maybe they intentionally don't want to provide a discount for there. Well, I would say that then, yes, you want to explicitly say that, yes, there's a zero amount discount because we know that particular range. Or more often than not, maybe they've put a typo in or a design document wasn't written correctly, but now we're presented with that ability and they can specify exactly what that order discount that they want to provide is. Any updates and changes to this are simply deployed, and this is actually what is invoked from the OpenEdge application. So now I want to hand back over to Carol, and we can talk about how these are used in a multi-wholesaler environment.
Thank you, Chris. So as you saw in Chris's demonstration there of Corticon, that we were taking a look at all of the different business rules. And as you saw in some of those different rule sheets, those were some pretty complex business rules. And can you imagine all of the ABL for those if then else statements? And if you have a problem with the application, trying to figure out where and which if then else statement and in which order does it go and which one stepped on which one, all of that is available within Corticon. It's easier to read, easier to dissect, easier to test and change. And when he did the test, notice he entered in some sample data, but you do have the capability of pulling in data from your database and testing it within Corticon as well. So it's a very rich tool and giving you that capability. So what we've shown you so far is an OpenEdge application that has ABL business logic and also interfaces with the Corticon business rules engine. So you can customize those rules by customer. So what we did is we had two different wholesalers deployed that we're simulating with our application. We have Chris and we have Carol. And those rules were different based on which wholesale was deployed. And that particular customizations were not stored in the code, okay? Not in the ABL application code. They're externalized within Corticon. And what the benefit of that is one set of source code to manage, right? So it makes your customizations easy to make for your customers because, as you know, everyone wants it customized. Everyone's business use case is different, and upgrades are easy to deploy. Remember this, having to maintain multiple sets of code for different use cases for different customers. I'm sure we've all been there because just like when Sally wanted her apple pie just a certain way with particular ice cream or with particular whipped cream, you want your application the right way, right? This is what you're staking your business on. Makes you competitive, makes you successful. Our goal, obviously, is to have many different applications because we want to be successful with thousands of customers. So maintaining thousands of pieces of code could be difficult. Now, why are you changing your code? Different customers have to comply with different rules. And what are those rules? In our example, we're looking at pricing promotions and discount promotions because we are wholesalers for sporting goods. But maybe your business needs to comply with government regulations, and they may change. Maybe it's discounting rules like our sample application or a new pricing promotion or a new version of software. And based on the version, you need different rules because different things come into play. Everyone has different reasons for changing their business rules. And change is just a matter of fact. It happens. It needs to happen, and it needs to make you able to roll with those changes and not make it painful, so that your customers can upgrade to new versions of software, so take advantage of new features. But what it comes down to is we're always customizing again and again and again. So let's take a look at customizing our application. In our sample here, we are going to be actually adding a brand new wholesaler. So we've sold a new customer. So the business analysts and for our partner here who sells this wholesaler application is going to go through and add rules specific for a particular new wholesaler. So this wholesaler is going to be Lee, for instance. So Chris is going to go through and actually create a whole new pricing scenario based on Lee's business requirements. Chris?
Wonderful, Carol. Thanks so much. So as you mentioned, traditionally, if you were going to deploy in a new environment where you're going to have customer-specific rules, or in this case, wholesaler-specific rules, you would have to go to the ABL. You'd have to hunt down where is that unique component found. Do you have unique .ps for each particular one? Do you have segments of code that try and branch through there? And it's a traditional application development lifecycle process. In this scenario, we're actually going to go back to the business rules, and we're going to add a rule sheet that is specific for the new wholesaler that we're implementing the system for. So in our collection of rule sheets, we can see that we have rules that are specific for Carol, we have a rule sheet that's specific for Chris. Now, I also have one that's pre-created ahead of time for Lee. So if we double click here, we can simply see that actually I have a copy of the same rule sheet, but I'm simply filtering where the wholesaler ID is Lee. And in these rule statements, we can see that Lee is actually a very generous person. He's going to be moving into this market. Looks like he's going to try and undercut both Carol and Chris and take market share, but he's going to take an extra 5% discount off of all of his particular orders. So to deliver the functionality of this new wholesaler, it's simply a process of adding those Lee-specific rules to our decision service. To do that, we're simply going to drag and drop that rule sheet into this area here, and we're going to link it together. So remember, these are some of our wholesaler-specific rules. So only if the wholesaler is Carol, we apply the Carol rules. Only if the wholesaler is Chris, the Chris rules. And finally, in this scenario, only if the wholesaler is Lee are we going to provide the Lee-specific rules. So once our rule flow is changed, what we want to do now is deploy this new decision service to the Corticon runtime server environment. And this is an incredibly painless process. So to do that, we're simply going to invoke our publishing wizard. This is the location of the Corticon server and the credentials to connect to that. And here we see this is the decision service that we're currently working with. Also along the power that we have is that we can have multiple versions of that same particular decision service. And in fact, this is version 1.0. Along with the versions, you can have effective dates. So this is incredibly powerful if you want to have a new version that might be applicable for only a certain date range. You can deploy a new version, apply date ranges that might only be good for the month of May, if you will. But the key there is you're not removing and sunsetting the old version because you might have to revert back to that after the end of May. Or you may find yourself in scenarios where you have to backdate a transaction. You might be grandfathered in under certain rules and regulations and say, well, what if we had made this decision 3 months ago? So you can imagine now if you've rolled out your new ABL code, you've basically erased the functionality or behavior of that application as it was previously. But by externalizing them in the rules platform and being able to support multiple versions at the same time with multiple effective dates, you've got a very, very rich behavioral pattern. So in this particular case, we want to deploy this decision service, but we already have version 1 deployed. So we either need to change the version or explicitly indicate that we want to republish and effectively overwrite the version. In this simple scenario, we'll simply overwrite the existing decision logic. So that decision service has been successfully published. And now from this point of view, I'm going to hand back over to Carol because she's going to simulate the deployment of the application to a new wholesaler, and we'll see how she delivers that. We'll switch back over into the OpenEdge design environment.
So we're going to open up our file here. So we're going to open up our that order entry UI that we were just in. And we're going to add our new wholesaler, Lee. All right. So I'm going to maximize this so you can see it. And we're going to go through and add our whole new wholesaler, Lee. So we've got rules for him. Now we just need to add his name. And say, OK. Generally, what we were talking about is you have one set of source code. So you don't have to actually add Lee. You're just deploying to a brand new wholesaler. But because we're showing this in a demo environment, we're showing it via the wholesaler ID being picked from this Dropbox. So we're going to save that, okay, and go back to the Visual Designer and run this application. So now we have a whole new wholesaler, Lee, okay, and we are going to go through and look for someone who is looking to buy product from wholesaler Lee. Again, same application, same logic happening behind the scenes. Search for my customer that's calling in for an order, and I'm going to add a variety of items to the cart based on their particular order that they want. I'm going to go through to the cart and add a quantity of 10, 20, 30, 5. Okay. Standard discount. Let's go see what happens when we call out to the business rules engine. Okay? So from a business rules engine, if you recall, when Chris went through and took the template for the rules, so they were standard rules for inventory, for pricing, discounting, and Lee had a particular discount. So if we scroll down through our list, remember he was being extra generous. He's going to try to put Chris and Carol out of business because he was giving this extra 5% discount. But all I had to do was go through and add a new rule sheet, put that into my rule flow, deploy it out to Corticon. I didn't actually touch any ABL code for business logic at this point, right? Because the business logic for the order came through from Corticon. And as Chris mentioned, these rules can be changed quickly and easily all outside of the ABL application. So I'm not going to be knee-deep in my if-then-else statement trying to find the appropriate place to put Lee's discounts so it doesn't get overwritten, and then automatically still inheriting the discounts for inventory, if I have high inventory, if I'm having special promotions on footwear and so forth. And those can also be changed because those were all controlled in the rule flow. So using the Corticon designer, I go through and do that. So I've added an extra order for Lee. He gets an extra discount. So you see how just by quickly and easily adding that whole new wholesaler, I am able to deploy the application without actually having to dive into the ABL application code.
So one of the added benefits that we have with externalizing these rules in Corticon is that in the background, as the Corticon server is executing and providing these decisions to the ABL application, it is understanding the nature of those requests. And we can actually see that. We can look at the expected outcomes, the execution times, and some even breakdown analytic information of the nature of the decisions. So let's take a look at the Corticon Server Console, which is a web-based administrative tool for interfacing with that. So once we log in, we're provided with a variety of information. We're going to drill down and look at the decision services that are deployed into the server. Now again, we'd be able to see all of the different services, if there were multiple versions, whether they have effective dates. From here we can see that we have one single decision service. This is our discounting service. We can see that that service has been executed 14 times and approximately an average of 3 milliseconds for each execution. From here we can drill down even further, see some statistical performance information, but I think of key inference information is the distribution charts of the data that has been flowing through as a result of these decisions. So we're currently configured to look at and analyze 2 bits of information for each one of these decisions. The first of this is the actual order discount total. So we defined some ranges that we thought were interesting, such as discounts that fall within a $0 to $50 amount. So of all the executions, 3 times the amount has fallen in that particular range. From 51 to 100 have accounted for 2 of our executions and greater than $100. You can also have it analyze each individual amount. For numeric versions, that tends to be quite challenging because every penny and every value creates a new range. So numerics, it's very beneficial to be able to set ranges. Another bit of information is the actual wholesaler ID that accompanied each one of these particular decisions. So we originally started with Carol and Chris, and then we added Lee as the 3rd time, and we can actually see now the percentage of times that decision has been either Chris wholesaler, the Carol wholesaler, or the Lee wholesaler.
So what have we shown you today? So we've shown you one OpenEdge application. In our case, it was a GUI for .NET application. However, you can use an interface with Corticon whether you're using character, web, mobile, OpenEdge GUI, Progress GUI, GUI for .NET. All those different types of applications can interface with Corticon. But the key here was that it was one OpenEdge application. I didn't have 5 different sets of code I was managing for those different wholesalers. We started with 2 wholesalers, Carol and Chris, with different business rules. If you recall, Chris had a bigger discount than Carol. You can tell who was writing the rules during the demo. So anyhow, and then we went through and we added a whole new wholesaler, Lee. And he was trying to undercut the businesses and do an even larger discount. So we were quickly and easily able to add new rules and change them on the fly without having to dig through our application code. We customized the rules for pricing, not the application code. What does that benefit? What does that help you with? Well, because those customizations are outside of the application, when you build the application and add new features, new functionality, you have the capability of upgrading both the application as well as the Progress version without losing the rules, because the rules have been externalized. And those highly effective rules, those well-tested rules that can change when you need them to change based on what's going on in your business, you still have access to those and you don't lose them, which is one of the main reasons customers have a hard time moving up to new versions of software, whether it be application software or Progress versions, is because they're afraid of losing their customizations. And this kind of negates that because we've externalized those rules. Here's an example of a customer, Akioma, who's a German partner of ours. They have a specialized CRM application that is built on top of Progress OpenEdge. Each client that they sell their application to has its own nuanced, detailed sales process and product parameters. These clients have their own rules, and the Akioma application itself has its own specific rules. The customer-defined rules are managed by Progress Corticon, externalized from the ABL business logic. That makes these complex customizations easy for Akioma to use and deal with, so it makes them very competitive, and they can change their application on the fly to deal with what their customers' requirements are. They do that by taking the rules from OpenEdge Engine, Corticon, and implementing them. They've separated the underlying application from the customer-specific rules. That makes the application software release compatible, meaning they can update their customers to new versions of the Akioma software as well as to new versions of OpenEdge without impacting these customizations. In our example today, we've been talking about pricing promotions, but there are many uses for business rules. As we mentioned, government regulations, maybe it's an insurance, whether you choose whether or not to offer an insurance discount, or whether you want to actually insure a person based on certain parameters. This makes, by externalizing your business rules, this makes having that externalized much more flexible and easy for the application to adapt to changes.
So in that scenario, we were discussing Akioma, which is an OpenEdge customer who chose to sort of extend and add the flexibility of Corticon into their application. But we also recognize that companies that have made investment in OpenEdge and ABL, they have other applications as well that are built on other technologies, Java or .NET. So we wanted to let you know that Corticon is also a standalone technology that can be used in your enterprise even outside of the OpenEdge platform. While we do have some great technology that integrates and makes using them together very, very effective, many customers are also benefiting from other applications. To take an example for another customer that is using Corticon, this is the NCAA. Now, they chose to onboard an application that they had previously outsourced, and this happened to be an Oracle PL SQL. And they were using this platform for academic eligibility for student athletes. Now, what we had an opportunity to do was, as they onboarded that and they wanted to migrate the core functionality into Corticon, but they actually had areas where they had to do parallel development to continue the platform. And so what we found is, for sort of greenfield development of application components with a comparison to sort of procedural application development, we saw as you broke it down from components of the analysis, design preparation, and implementation, a module that would comparison take about 225 hours in the PLSQL development cycle was approximately 22 hours in the Corticon platform. So which you can see that's a 10x improvement. I think the real power comes in because you build something once and then you're constantly modifying and updating it later on. And what might seem to be a very trivial change or addition, you can find out because the nature of rules, having dependencies and interactions, things that seem trivial actually have very, very complex and sometimes difficult to identify impacts. And what they were able to see is that change cycles of existing logic, what took upwards of 50 hours in the traditional development lifecycle, was a 2-hour process in Corticon. So that ability, as I showed you, to find any flaws and inconsistencies or gaps in your existing logic, being able to immediately identify those and resolve those without going through exhaustive user acceptance testing, really drives and benefits shows the power of the Corticon platform. So when can you benefit from that? I'm sure that you're probably thinking, I have lots of if-then statements. I have lots of areas that might be rule types of scenarios. Well, I think there's some things that you can focus on at the very, very high level. The first is, are you enabling relatively complex decisions? Certainly not making the argument that every simple if-then statement is a place that you should externalize and put in a Corticon decision. But the more complex they are, you begin to see some of the real benefit of putting those in Corticon and utilization of that. Do you have areas where you have highly specific customization or personalized for every end user or every end customer or different departments and regions? Again, that's an area where you might begin to think that Corticon can add that value. And I think that probably one of the most important is, are you frequently changing those? If you're always having to go back and make those types of updates, so you can see that area of a 25x improvement, if you're constantly having to spend 100 hours a month on updating that for a particular customer or region, imagine being able to deliver that in, say, an hour or less. What could that extra time mean to you? And then finally, the accuracy, making sure that those rules are correct and accurate, so those changes are going to deliver what you want. And then finally, the transparency. You saw how I was able to show in a non-programmatic metaphor exactly what that business logic was. You can present that. You can show the results of that. You don't have to sort of say, well, go look in the ABL to figure out how we're doing that. So the more times you can say yes to these particular answers, I really think that's the greater benefit that you can get from applying Corticon.
Great. Thank you very much, Carol and Chris. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you once again, everybody, for attending today's Progress webinar, Success Stories and Demo, OpenEdge Rules in Action. On your screen, you'll see a list of the speakers and their respective emails. Please feel free to reach out to them directly if you like. We have a few questions that have come in during the webinar, and we will start with a few of these as we wait to see if any additional questions are sent in momentarily. So first and foremost, and I think we might have answered this as we went through the demonstration, but in the sales order example, how does the customer know what the various line item discounts and order discounts are, i.e. the details that lead to the line item and bottom line net amounts?
In our case, we were simulating that we are a customer service rep at the wholesaler, right? And the rules are being sent out to Corticon, and then we had that text box that showed us what the rules were applied to that particular order. So I can actually tell the customer, kind of like when you go to Kohl's today and they say, hey, today you saved this much money because we had these sales going on, and it shows it on your receipt. So that particular text box on the screen showed what these savings were, that they got a 2.5% discount if they ordered from Chris's wholesaler. This particular item had an extra discount because it had high inventory. So it was over 10,000 inventory, so we're doing a little extra promotion on that. We were doing a promotion on footwear items, so we can actually detail what each of those are. And then, in our case, we were displaying it to the screen for demonstration purposes. You could print it to the customer and put it on their receipt. But that's the beauty of Corticon, is because you have the rules detailed, that information can come back to the customer service rep in the method that you want it to.
Also, the rule statements that we saw used in the studio there, the rule statements can actually be applied or linked together to any element in the data hierarchy level. So we had a simplistic scenario where we had a customer and we had line item orders. Well, I can either apply that rule statement to the customer and say it was the customer that drove this particular discount information. But I could also apply that rule statement and say it was this particular line item that drove that. And some of those, we had those scenarios based upon the category of that. You might have also find that there might be a vendor associated with an item. There might be the wholesaler associated with that order. So I can link those together and say what exact piece of information or data was that linked to and sort of drove that particular information.
When I'm testing my rules, can I test them against the real data in my database versus mock-up data?
Yes. So in the example that we showed today, Chris put up some mock-up data for testing purposes, just sample scenarios, and you can do that. But also you may be doing this particular rule against data in your OpenEdge database. So there is an enterprise data connector that gives you that capability to connect it to the database, pull the data from the appropriate tables, pull it into the rule test, and then test the rules that way.
What kind of training is necessary to be proficient at rule modeling?
Great. So Corticon rule modeling is actually an incredibly easy to acquire skill set. There's actually 2 courses that we deliver as both either an on-site instructor-led or also as part of our web-based learning module. There's a one-day introductory rule modeling training class, and after that one day, you would be able to use and deliver all of the components that you saw us do today. There's also an additional class, which is a 2-day advanced rule modeling, and that really takes you into advanced scenarios of dealing with hierarchical information, collections, and sets of data. So that's a grand total of 3 days to make you a highly skilled, proficient rule modeler.
What is the nature of the integration between OpenEdge and Corticon?
It's all done via web services. So whether you're an OpenEdge 10 application or an OpenEdge 11 application, you can interface with Corticon. We made that interface even easier in OpenEdge 11.3, where we integrated the environments and we created these procedure libraries, so it's all handled via the ABL. So you saw in one of the slides that Chris presented the ABL business logic, where we were connecting into and calling over to the Corticon server via ABL business logic, and the procedure libraries help that connectivity. So they hide all the intricacies of the web services, but you can go direct via web services as well.
What version of OpenEdge do I need to be running for this integration?
As I mentioned, OpenEdge 10 and higher, because OpenEdge 10 is when we introduced web services capabilities. 11.3 is when we introduced the tighter integration, which makes it a lot easier, but as long as you're OpenEdge 10 and higher, you can interface with Corticon.
Lastly, I'd like to ask, where can someone go to learn even more about Corticon?
The Progress.com website. The Akioma story is out there. They have some great information about how they implemented Corticon and how it benefited them, as well as our community's website. There's a section on Corticon. There's white papers. There's videos. So there's a lot of resources on Progress.com as well as communities.com.
I would also add to that you can go to the website, progress.com/Corticon, and you can actually download and evaluate the Corticon Studio and get that software directly.
Excellent. That'll be something we should be offering to all of our attendees and registrants for today's webinar. If there are any remaining questions that we might not have answered during the presentation, we'll address those directly with the people that had submitted the questions. Again, thank you all very much for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars.